All right, welcome to another INTJF type interview. I'm your host TGA, and today I get to interview Suraj. Suraj, wanna say hi?
Yeah. Hey guys, what's up?
All right. So, getting right to it, do you remember your first time being exposed to MBTI and your first type result?
Yes. Actually, no, I don't remember my first type result. So this was in high school. We had a day. We went to the career center, junior year of high school for me. So I was, I don't know, 16 or something. And so we took it. I don't know if it was the MBTI, but it may have been an adapted version. But in any case, all I remember on that was two things. One, I got introverted, which I was unhappy with, and two, I got your type is rare or something like that. So I was skeptical at the time. I was like, oh, flattery will get you nowhere. But what I did actually was I wanted to retake the test. I didn't like my introversion score. So I asked them, can I retake this? And I kind of gamed it to get extroversion. Stupid. But that's all I remember from then. Um, but my deeper immersion into MBTI began when I was an undergraduate, which wasn't that long ago, a few years ago. And I was scoring INTP quite a bit. I scored INTP first. I joined an INTP forum first, and I found a lot of relatability among those users, them and myself. So I kept digging into the system, and I was a psychology philosophy major in undergraduate, so it was pretty congruent with I suppose, where my educational or professional path was leading. So I got INTP, and then I obsessed over Myers-Briggs for like 2 years, and neglected coursework to some extent, just because I was so deep. It was just this really. I had this sick obsession at the time with like introspection and figuring myself out, figuring other people out, and MBTI was it's a convenient way to do that. It's a simple enough way for most people to wrap their heads around the basics. Um, so yeah, and I during I guess the obsession was like 2.5 years. But anyway, the second year I was really torn. I knew I was borderline on TF and JP. Um, Even though the INTP result, I eventually had to go to our career center and take an officially administered Myers-Briggs. And I got INTP on that, and I had my counselor convinced of that as well. Um, and so I did that, spent some more time with it. I think that my intuition may have been kind of like, but it's not really right, or it could be more right than just INTP. So I dug further, and I remember once the critical moment was joining INTJ forum. Well, my first thread was like relationship advice, and I just hanging. So then I made a type me thread during my finals one quarter to get away from them. Uh, so I made a type me thread, and it ended up being like a dual type me thread with another INTJ. It doesn't go on here anymore, but we were both, uh, exploring it together. I met Rexful and Jindy. Is it still recording?
Yeah, it's still recording. It seems like
Oh,
there's a bit of a lag, it looks like.
uh,
Looks like we're still good here.
okay. I'll just go. Uh,
Uh, Hello?
so nobody in real life I knew was as steeped in the system as I was. In academia, Myers-Briggs is for the most part looked down upon. What we call it pseudoscience. People on the forum themselves have that kind of view of it. But actually, it does match up pretty well with the big five, mostly intuition, introversion, and P and J. Thinking and feeling is, I think, the messiest of the dimensions. Also the kind of the most debatable. There's more to that though. Maybe I'll go into that later. But um, in any case, that typing thread helped me see. People would ask me, just describe your life or describe your interest, or so I gave an account at one point. It was a pretty long one, and it was completely different from how the other INTJ participating in that thread said she would describe it herself. I described my life very much in terms of people who were important, influentially, and friends and family and stuff like that. So that kind of made me think, well, maybe I am a feeler after all. And Reckful has noted that that NFs and maybe especially NF males, but I'm not going to go into that. They might mistype more often on the instrument as NTs. So and I could see that there's some items on there that I could point to and say, yeah, I could see why that would lead to that false result. But so anyway, participating in that thread, I pretty much came to the answer of INFJ, but I still wasn't sure, and it still took like half a year to a year more to actually really be convinced of it. And I did that with the functions actually at first. Nowadays, I don't really need the functions. Tebow often says the functions have been disproven. I'm not entirely sure. Like, I haven't looked into that or the studies that may have been carried out for that. And it also seems like a tough thing to disprove per se. Like, you could say, INFPs and Js, let's say they're both close to the PJ borderline. Functions theory would have that their functions are entirely different. So that's one thing. Another thing is, FI dominant versus NI dominant. There's some clear differences there. But ultimately, I think functions are not. I think they're useful for people to describe their mental process and also their approach to the world if we're talking about extroverted functions. It gives them a language to do that, even if the language might not be, the most scientifically respectable or supported or any of that. But there's really no other, like, even within research psychology, there's nothing like that. The cognitive functions framework. There's no like typology of the functions are if they were revised in a right way and they were studied more closely with what we actually know about personality in relation to these four MBTI constructs, then it could be made more accurate and therefore more useful. But anyway, I use the functions, and NI was one I really identified with, and so that's also kind of why I decided on INFJ at first, and FE as well.
All right, so just kind of going back to the start, you mentioned as one of your first results in high school when you got introverted, and you said you were not too happy with the result. Why was that the case? Do you want it to be an extrovert?
Well, nowadays I'm a lot more comfortable with the fact that I'm an introvert. I'm not sure. It's hard to say just how introverted. The tests can give you a decent idea of, they could stack you up against all of the other people who've taken the test and all the people in the database. So in relation to those people, it could give you an idea of just how introverted or extrovert you are. I think these days I'm a little closer to the border than I've been, but I'm still an introvert, and I'm happy with that. I think back then I was more social and more socially involved. I was in a rock band, so I guess I had a little more of an image, an outer image to hold on to, and the introversion was something I knew but didn't want to admit. So it was just kind of like me trying to mitigate my discomfort by lying to myself, basically.
Okay. Yeah. Then you mentioned going into undergrad and you was kind of scoring on the INTP line, and you mentioned intuition-wise you didn't feel it was 100% spot on, like it could have been better. What was it about the INTP that was kind of missing or tipping you off that something wasn't 100% right?
Well, my undergraduate, I consider quite a key phase in my life relative to before then and even now. Now I think I've recovered my J bit, as it were. But so the P was kind of like, yeah, this makes sense right now, but in the past and taking the rest of my life into account, J just seemed more correct. Regarding T and F, I think it's just that primitive note. The construct, in my opinion, I think I kind of committed that fallacy of like wanting to be a thinker and like thinking that being a thinker means you're smarter or necessarily more logical. So I considered myself logical, but of course now my definition of logic is different because I've taken like formal logic and I've studied it quite a bit and all. But I think that was kind of the basis for thinking, well, I'm a T, but I'm also very emotionally sensitive and pretty interpersonally interested. all those things.
Okay, well then, kind of looking on at the kind of between the J and P, what was going on at the time that you demonstrated more of a P trait versus your J? Can you give us
I
like an
was,
example or two?
yeah, yeah. In the abstract, I guess to start with, I was, I wasn't sure what to do with, like perhaps many other college people or people that age. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I did have to take that kind of approach. Like, what do I want to do with my life? I was very insistent on that sort of approach rather than just letting things happen and seeing where I end up. Um, so in that sense, I had all of the possibilities at play in my head, and to an extent, I was a little paralyzed. I was still doing things. I was still relatively active, but I was very much like in the state of, holy crap, I have only so much longer to figure out what I want to do with my life and how I want to apply my talents, interests, my morals or values and all of that. So it was basically, it was unraveling from the structure I had before, high school. It's very structured, of course. My my family life was pretty structured. Both my parents are J. Well, my dad might not be, but um, so it was really just kind of this finding myself, and it had to happen in a way that I could unravel. And I guess that's kind of the key thing. I didn't necessarily know what I was going to do day to day, and it was kind of just this exploration phase. So that's why I would say it was more P than J at that point.
Okay, well now that you've kind of settled with an INFJ, do you feel you're now that intuition you had before when you were an INTP where you didn't feel 100%, do you feel 100% now, or could there be something that might be missing still?
Well, there's neuroticism, which is missing from the Myers-Briggs framework. That's the big five. But other than that, I think there may be some correlation between MBTI feeling and Big Five neuroticism. We'd have to check with the experts on the forum. I don't consider myself a Myers-Briggs expert. It's kind of fun. It's a good way to relate to people on a certain level. Um, but anyway, I have less. Okay, so here's the thing. I was a philosophy major also, and right now I'm in a psychology PhD program. It's quite a bit more philosophical a psychology PhD than most psychology PhDs are. So I am a bit of a snob for the theory and for theoretical sophistication. And Myers-Briggs is pretty simplistic as the definitions of its constructs go, and as its, in my opinion, as its view of the human goes, it's pretty simplistic. Um, that's not to say that it's not meaningful or that it's not tapping into these dimensions that are, they're global and they're, some of them at least follow a bell curve as far as the distributions and strength of preferences go. But I think these days even the big five I have my reservations regarding, but in general, I would say Myers-Briggs is something that uh, I don't really need it as much anymore. Um, I think back then it was very useful as I was trying to discover myself and my interests, talents, and it is very predictively powerful in that way. People do fall pretty neatly into certain occupations depending on the type and so forth. Um, but and arguably that's kind of circular or just adding a name to what these types of people are. But anyway, um, so that's pretty much my attitude toward it these days. A little more neutral than it had been in the past. It was a little bit obsessive at one point.
Yeah, okay. Well, then in terms of being an INFJ, what is the top two or three traits that you find yourself having that kind of falls in line as being a stereotyped INFJ?
Ah, well, I could answer that as INFJ goes, or I could answer that in parts. So I'll start with introversion and intuition, which are my two strongest preferences. Um, and it was painful for me. Like I realized this during undergrad. I cannot function like this as just like extremely introverted, extremely intuitive kind of like person. I had I had inklings for the places I more naturally belong to, or for the things that I liked to do. But those two have been the most, I would say, definitive of my life thus far. Um, feeling and thinking is, when I go on the INTJ forum, I feel like a feeler in INTJ forum. No questions about that. Um, just as far as like interpersonal or social awareness goes. Not to say all the T's are logical necessarily or any of that, but um,
Well, could you give an
construct-wise,
example of like in comparison when you mentioned you're on INTJ forums, you feel like you're very on the F side. What was it on? What's on the forum that's making you feel that way?
well, I guess it's the more you look at T's on the forum or people who think they're T's talking about like social dynamics, um, a lot of it's just really like intuitive or obvious to me, or I'd already like thought about it at an earlier age or stage in my life. But there are people that are like older than me, quite significantly, still like wrestling with those sorts of questions. The things that they're good at, like certain, I guess you could collapse under logical, quantitative type of thinking, objective thinking, which is something that I think youth excel more at or tend to prefer. Those things are kind of things I'm growing more into now, but I had a phase where I was just kind of not so into that stuff. So I think those are two examples. I can see people talking about physics or economics on the forum, and I could be like, yeah, these guys are T's and they know their stuff. Um, but yeah, it's mostly for me the seeing how T's talk about people and social dynamics and even feelings and just how they deal with their own feelings and the feelings of others that really makes me feel like an F. I feel more expressive, less reserved about admitting that I'm feeling something than a lot of the formites seem to be.
Okay, cool. Then, in terms of the stereotype that you don't fit in with an INFJ, what would be kind of those traits that you would have if you have them?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there is, of course, arguably, for some of us on the forum, the least favorite stereotype of the INFJs that we're necessarily this kind of new agey type of person that we're, necessarily, we're mystics or gurus. And that's a little bit more aligned with Carl Jung's conception of the introverted intuitive as a sort of mystic or a crank or a genius gone wrong, to put it in his words. I think that sort of stereotype's not giving INFJs enough credit. It is true that NFs fall more into the clerical professions or like the clergy, for example, religious occupations than NTs or maybe any other type. That much is true, but as far as like this new ageism without any skepticism or any scientific sensibilities or any rationality, that's probably the stereotype that I'm like, no, no thanks.
So it's kind of like what Kirsanov said. You guys are not exactly psychics.
Yeah, a psychic is, it's somebody who thinks okay, either they're a rare special person and they happen to have, they have an extreme intuition or something, and they have this sort of cosmic sensibility, or or they're a mystic, or they're like how to put it in words. If they make a life's work out of like the art of prediction, but like prediction doesn't need to be this mystical sort of I just know and nothing will refute it and the future will unfold this way. Obviously, that's a dangerous way to try to exercise predictive powers. When I read those stereotypes of INFJs and INTJs like being psychic, to me it's really just it translates into we tend to be pretty good predictors of certain perhaps closed situations or systems.
Okay. Then looking into your other interests in hobby, you mentioned you're now in a PhD program for psychology. What initially got you interested into, well, in your undergrad, double majoring psych and philosophy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always been into philosophy. I think my senior year of high school, I took an AP literature class. I was pretty into literature at that time, and I was leaning a little bit more toward the humanities and away from the hard sciences or the quantitative sides of things. But for psychology in senior year of high school, we read some existentialist literature. So we read Camus, we read some Sartre, and that stuff really spoke to me in a way that nothing had before that, and it kind of helped me figure out my own identity, uh, let go of a lot of like the preconceptions about existence, life, and myself that I had before then. So, and it's a very psychological process. Existentialist philosophy is very psychological. Um, so that's what inspired me to get more into the human sciences and psychology specifically. Um, and I philosophy was something that I knew. Well, I knew my choices of major would not sit well with my parents. So eventually, I just had to say, screw it. I'm just going to do it anyway. But it was kind of this. I had to kind of tiptoe around it a bit, and I explored other things, even though I knew that I liked philosophy. But I didn't necessarily like the way that all psychology and philosophy are done academically. During my undergrad, coming from a background of existentialist literature and having an AP psych course, I was not familiar with how psychology as a whole works academically. Um, it's very, uh, it's less conceptual. It's more statistics based. It's and it's a new science, so it's having some growing pains. That's evident in certain aspects of it. But the bottom line is that inspiration I felt from the existentialist literature and philosophy was missing from my psychology and my philosophy curricula as an undergrad. So I had to kind of make my own way, read on my own time. Um, and the program I'm in now is much more explicitly um, sympathetic toward the existentialist and humanistic approaches to psychology, which ironically now I've had enough of it. And now I'm kind of like it's easy for me, but I do now I'm studying like all this more quantitative logic, science stuff on my own time. But that's the stuff that inspired me, so that's kind of why I just followed it. And here I am.
Okay. Then what is kind of your goal or expectation in terms of your work, well, of getting a PhD in psychology? Is there a goal that you have in mind, or kind of a career path?
Mm-hmm. Well, the easy answer, or depending on your view of the job market, would be academia, be a professor. Um, of course, the market is quite challenging at this point, but I was drawn to that at the same time that even publish or perish, this saying in academia, it kind of appealed to me because in undergrad I was not a hard worker, and I didn't have anything I felt inspired to work toward, which is quite different these days. I'm working on a couple different projects, papers, and things that I want to get published eventually. Um, in my first years, so I'm kind of hitting the ground running now, and I'm just kind of going with it and seeing what comes of it, while also keeping in mind that academia is a tough thing to make happen, especially in a full-time tenured kind of way. So I guess that would be ideal. If not that, though, I still want to keep writing, and I would still love to publish. I mean, you don't have to be an academic to publish books or even in journals, really. You can do all of that and not be an academic um, in a working at a university as a professor. But yeah, those are my two things. Writing has kind of been this consistent theme in my life, where if I want to figure something out or if I want to exercise my strength, writing has been kind of the go-to. So that would definitely have to be part of it.
Okay. Then kind of going back a little bit, you mentioned in terms of your selection of majors and knowing that your parents might not be exactly thrilled with your choice. What would they want you to pick major-wise?
Back then, they were really gunning for me doing economics, which now I study on my own time, but back then it just wasn't the right thing for me. So, I went as far as to like take some accounting class, take some of the pre-major classes for economics, but after that I was just done. Um, so thankfully I didn't sink too much, like misery into it when I was really in this mode that I wanted to explore philosophy and psychology. Um, so yeah, they would have preferred economics. My parents are both, in my view, pretty practical people, whereas I'm not necessarily. So my mom is she's an HR. She's a VP of an HR department for a healthcare company. My dad he has an engineering background, He did some consulting, environmental engineering for a while, and now he's getting into the arts and he's like working on a movie now, which is cool. I'm kind of helping him with a little bit. But so that's what they would have, I think, liked from me before. But I also think they didn't really know me that well, which is kind of weird to say. Whereas now I think we're all more on the same page, and now it's them saying, like my dad's like, yeah, you philosophy and science, or these are good areas for you, and they make perfect sense. Whereas I'm a little more reserved as far as practical outcomes and realities and things like that go. So it's kind of funny how things have switched around in that way.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Then in terms of them being convinced or switching over, was that transition during your undergrad, or now that you've gone into a PhD program, they've come to accept that as you?
I think I think maybe the start of it was my senior year of undergrad. I was in this place where I was doing psychology and philosophy, but I picked my majors pretty late in the game, like as a junior, just because I was tiptoeing around this whole, and it's worth keeping in mind I'm from an Indian family, so there are these more rigid first generation. So there are these more like rigid, I think, ideas of what we should be doing. I have a brother, so there is that kind of Indian family, Indian parents aspect to it, but there's also I think when in my senior year of undergrad was really my time of exploring my writing and exploring my interests in science, psychology, philosophy. I was all over the place as far as my writing went. I became a writer for our campus's biggest newspaper, and I just submitted an opinion piece on word disorder, which I dislike, and they really liked it, and then they wanted me for the science tech section, which wasn't my intention at the time. And so I think as I began writing more and more and publishing more newspaper articles, and it was more than just writing. It was interacting with like departments on campus. Like I was working pretty closely with the theoretical physics department my senior year. Um, so I think once my parents kind of like saw that side of me that they didn't really know as well before, my writing side, my philosophical side, my inquisitive side, I guess you could say, they kind of came to accept it. And when I had my first job out of undergrad, I think they kind of we all kind of figured it out together that that certain things make more or less sense for me in a career sense.
Now, was this also kind of going at the same time as you discovering or coming to terms with being an INFJ?
That was a little bit after. So once they kind of settled my type question, then I began to explore everything else. I kind of felt like um, figuring out Myers-Briggs. I mean, it is a powerful framework. Again, predictive, which is one reason I was so interested in it, was kind of matching my own interests against it and seeing how well they fit and where they fit. But it happened, I would say, on the tail end of figuring out my type, is that I got into journalism and then I got into academics more. Um, that stuff all just followed from my lengthy elaboration of my type.
Okay. Then kind of looking back or even looking forward as of right now, would there be a trait or type of someone else that they have that you wish you could also have as well?
Oh, like another. Well, I think INFJ is a cool type. I remember when I was figuring it out, I had Kiersey's book. Now I'm a little bit more reserved regarding some of Kiersey's theories. Rechtel has made a good post about it. He kind of does this project of connecting four Myers-Briggs clusters, NS, NTs, SPs, and SJs, with some of the ancient Greek ideas regarding temperament, which was like Hippocrates' four biles or his four humors, black bile, and those people are like more, they embody more of a certain personality trait. So Kiersey tries doing that, and basically what I, where was I going with Kiersey? um,
In terms of traits, or what the question was,
ah,
would there be any other trait that you would like to have that doesn't come easy for you, or just behavior-wise? And you mentioned INFJs are pretty cool, and then you went off into the Kiersey's book.
right, yeah, sorry. Um, so yeah, I actually, when I was figuring out my type with Kiersey, I was going through each of his portraits of the types and highlighting what I identified with what I didn't. I narrowed it down to the four IN types, and I highlighted more in the INFJ article or essay of his than any of the other four IN types. I highlighted basically the whole portrait, but for some reason, I was still mostly focusing on the other three IN types. And I think I thought INFJ was too cool a type for me to be. uh, I think that's literally one reason that I was so slow to accept it. Um, but so I don't really have envy of other types. It's more of appreciation and more of things I can learn from other types, like ENTJs, which my dad is, or an ENTJ. You know, we're very different. You know, they're much more objectivizing or logicizing and much more, you know, to the extent that they're not neurotic, which is, again, maybe related to feeling. But ENTJs is one big contrast between myself and them that, you know, extroversion is pretty useful in a lot of ways that I can admit, look back at my life and admit, you're a little more, you know, if you challenge your introversion more there, you could have had a more, potentially more fulfilling outcome there. But I don't really deliberate on that too much. I just kind of take the good from each type that I come across and kind of appreciate or strive to embody those things as they're appropriate for my goals and things like
Okay. Then kind of going a little like halfway back, you mentioned upon discovering you're an INFJ and now doing or going into the work that you're in, you feel like you've kind of outgrown MBTI. Is that kind of the gist of it? Am I understanding you correctly?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of things I appreciate about the Myers-Briggs framework and the project. I mean, a lot of psychology is pretty remote from people's real lives, whereas Myers-Briggs is very accessible and also pretty, you know, not as pseudoscientific as a lot of its critics make it out to seem. Um, and I think the functions may have a part in that. Whether or not they've been disproven is separate from whether or not they actually are, you know, correct. Or so the functions can confuse people in a lot of instances, and maybe for that reason, and it's not studied scientifically like at all. So for that, maybe that's one contributor for why people think Myers-Briggs is pseudoscience. The other reason, main reason, is that it's from out of the academy. You know, Isabel Myers was not an academic or a psychologist, um, so there's that reason for why people. But I would say I've outgrown it conceptually, and I've kind of moved past it in terms of what I feel I could gain from it. And I've internalized it well enough that I can relate it pretty well to just about anyone I meet. Um, that's one convenience, one advantage of its simplistic language. Which, yeah, in my academic work, it's definitely I'd say I've outgrown it, and I wouldn't really want to. I wouldn't want to be like a Myers-Briggs personality psychologist as a full-time kind of thing, you know.
Okay.
Um,
And then, well, we are kind of running a little over time, but one last question is, since you mentioned in terms of going from one project or obsessing over one project and then moving on to another, and it seems like you had a mode of obsessing with MBTI, and now that you're kind of done with it, or for lack of a better word, solve or crack the puzzle, what is your new obsession now?
my new obsession. I think I've become a little more balanced, perhaps wiser with age. I I have an INTP housemate, and you know, we kind of joke about certain things, and he, you know, I mentioned casually, you know, I'd be a little bit obsessional, or I might have sort of obsessive personality. Something is like, you think? He's teasing, but I think there may be some truth. So I don't know what it is right now. Right now, it's been consciousness, and I'm trying not to say that and have people think I'm being a new agey INFJ, but consciousness in a scientific context, in basically every context it's studied in, has recently been my prevailing interest. Can we have a science of consciousness? Can we, you know, what methods do we need to employ? What is consciousness? Because nobody in philosophy or psychology knows, which is kind of central to the discipline of psychology, but it's very neglected within psychology. So I would say that's the subject that I'm most fascinated by right now. And it also, I think the saving grace and what will save me from entering another vacuum like Myers-Briggs was to an extent is that consciousness really incorporates or includes everything in our experience, our conscious experience. So when I say I'm studying consciousness, I'm kind of studying life, or I'm kind of studying experience, or I'm kind of studying everything that could be an object of conscious awareness or thought. So, or what's not a conscious thought. Like it's kind of contrastive analysis. You have to, if you want to understand something, it may help to think of the absence of it or the unconscious. So I would say that's my, if I do have one right now, my obsession. But self-sufficiency is kind of the other like thing that I'm really trying to work on right now. You know, being an adult and all of that sort of
Okay. Well, we are at the 35-minute mark.
stuff. Okay,
Thank you for volunteering for the type interviews.
of course. Thanks, TJ.
All right. I'll start recording here.